Please be seated. Proceedings are resumed. The Honorable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to ask a few questions on the bill before the House. The first question, the member for Eastern has already dealt with the statement from the mover about having to completely redo the law that's only 2 years old. But so I won't deal with that. But in subsection 4 of the bill, where we talk about there has to be a clear demarcation between the areas used within the premises for the dispensing of intoxicating liquor under each license. I wonder if in his winding up, the minister can give some idea of what kind of demarcation. Is it a concrete wall, or is it just a half shelf dividing the area? Because I have some concerns, Mr. Speaker. In my community, presently, we have one package dealer in a location that has just been sold. The persons who had the package license there are building their own facility immediately next door in a separate building. It is my understanding that the people who purchased the building are also, or have also applied for a package license. And then there's a sign on Frankstown Road by the new little strip mall that Jake Scott is putting in a package license there as well. I would assume that that's a package license they're putting in there. And when we look at some of the fact that these package license places are now going to be open on Sunday, although the minister says he's going to restrict it from, I think it was 1 o'clock till 7 o'clock. There are some churches within that vicinity that do have services within that time frame. And in fact, most of the churches have evening meetings on Sunday, which could be affected by that. And then we have the problem, Mr. Speaker, with these package license, and where in here it says must not be consumed on the premises. We have been dealing in Northside with what we now term the Walmart greeters, where there's a whole collection of young people, and I believe that this happens in other districts where they have these package licenses as well. Particularly, I know that the same situation is in Peace Bay. And these young people, and some full-grown people, congregate around these places by simply moving to the next parcel of land. So that legally, the package license is free to sell them to the persons because they're not consuming on the premises. But the effect of that is that they go, in particular in our side, they simply go across the street onto private property. There's a huge litter problem. There's an antisocial problem that is created around the whole thing. We managed to get the police to raid there that's probably more than a year ago now, because the community suspect that there are other things being sold in that whole gathering of antisocial behavior. And in fact, in the one time that the police raided it, they did in fact arrest 2 or 3 people for selling drugs. I don't know if the answer, Mr. Speaker, is to put a distance. In other words, cannot be consumed within 1,500 feet, 1,000 feet within the facility. Because here's what we have to, Mr. Speaker, is in this particular case, there is also a restaurant and a bar. under these amendments here, that restaurant will be able to serve alcohol without selling food, right? So in that one place, we are going to have 3 facilities, or as many as 4 facilities, that are selling alcohol to these people who are congregating across the street. Because although the license for the bar says it has to be consumed on the premises, it's very difficult for the police to determine whether the beer that they're consuming or the alcohol did not come from the retail, the package place, or from the retail facility. So I would ask the minister to think about that and see if we can put in some distance requirement, because most people, you would assume, if they're going to a package license place to buy alcohol, they're taking it on a boat or they're taking it to home, to their house or something. They really shouldn't be able to congregate just simply across. And in fact, the proprietors of what was known as Kurt Corner and the other place had a bigger problem because they were doing it on the adjacent lot. And they had to cut down a wonderful mahogany tree so that the hot sun would run them. And they just moved across the street, which is even closer to the package license. And it is a big problem with litter and everything else. So I would ask him to see if we can do something about it. My other concern is in clause 6 with amendment to section 9, where it appears to me section 9(1) now says, a board may not grant a license unless satisfied that the premises in respect to which the application is made, A, have exits plainly marked and lighted, B, have an adequate fire extinguisher system. And it seems to me that clause 6 is proposing to delete paragraphs A and B. Are we now saying that these liquor premises, restaurants, and everybody else do not have to provide properly marked exits and fire extinguishing, or are you relying on planning?
They have to provide a fire inspection. But the fire inspections are already required for it.
Right.
So it's a duplication of.
So does the fire department have the necessary statutory authority to say that they must have fire exits marked and a fire extinguishing system in these facilities? Or do they have to rely on planning?
No, they have fire hazard on code, and then fire, they have to get approval for the license to be renewed. So we don't need to go back and look at it. So it's being duplicated.
Okay.
So just take it out.
And those, is there a requirement in the law that those inspections happen on a regular basis? Or is it only when they have to apply for renewal license? Because if they can turn the exit lights off and only light them up when the fire department is coming, because that's normally done by appointment by the fire people, and check the fire extinguisher. I think we need to have, for the safety of the people in those facilities, we need to have some kind of regular inspection and certification that's ongoing to make sure that these facilities, because although it hasn't happened here, but we have seen in other jurisdictions where in these facilities they put chains and stuff on the exit doors, fire exit doors, and when they have a fire, the people can't get out, so they burn up in the building. So I think we need to, if we're going to address that paragraph, I would actually consider putting in something that says that they can, at any time, the fire department can come and inspect it, and they must meet fire code, as opposed to just annually when they go around to it. And I'm curious, in clause 7, section 10, the new clause 10B, well, 4A and B says, does not permit disposal to another licensee for the purpose of disposal by that licensee under the terms of his license. Does that mean that if Bar A in Northside does not get their delivery from the wholesalers, they cannot go to Bar B and buy a few cases of beer to get them over the weekend. Is that what we're prohibiting there? Because that's what I think it will be the effect of it. And while that might not be so important in Georgetown, I can tell you that it could be a frequent occurrence in the eastern districts in terms of just a couple of cases to get them through the weekend if they have a special event or something. And the new clause 4.7 does in fact mean that any restaurant can operate like a bar, i.e. it can sell alcohol, because we're removing the requirement from the law to purchase food. So anybody can then go into a restaurant and buy alcohol without buying food, which I believe is the effect of that. And you might have some resistance from some of the businesses on that. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few concerns, we will support the bill.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The member from Savannah?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is just some feelings from my side, and not really in the existing bill, but in the future, in the constant proliferation of these liquor stores. I remember, Mr. Speaker, when I was part of a government, when I vigorously opposed the liquor store in Countryside. And I remember, thankfully, when you and one of your other colleagues came up to the Savannah School to support me. And what I'm saying to the minister is that in the future, my belief personally, there's another liquor store on the other side of the road, but this one at that time was within probably less than 100 feet of a primary school with children 6 to 10, 11 years old. Not only that, Mr. Speaker, there was at that time 3 churches within another couple of 100 feet. And many people will call me antique and old-fashioned, but ultra-conservative. But I know that the old-time Caymanians would have taken great umbrage and concern about this being so close to the churches, and specifically more concerned is the ones close to the primary schools. So in drafting any further legislation or changes which you indicate may come, I would ask that you bear in mind that the location in proximity, especially to the schools. Thank you.
Dealing with funerals, so. Waiting on the minister. What is anybody else? Doesn't seem like any other member is going to speak. So I'll call on the minister to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the members who offered comments on the bill and those who supported. As a member from East End, rightfully said there was a revision of this bill a couple of years back, and there were some advancements done at that time, primarily surrounding the moratorium that was in place and to deal with the black market that was happening with the leasing and loaning and renting of licenses and sales of licenses. The ministry at that time, Mr. Speaker, had begun a much more comprehensive review, but based on the desire from the general public and the need for the revision on the issue of the moratorium, it was decided that they would bring what they had to the House at that time to advance that section or the issues surrounding that. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Leader of the Opposition inquired about the subsection 4, the clear demarcation used. And Mr. Speaker, that is exactly it, is that when you have the retail license with a bar, that there is an area where the bar is situated that's identified and falls in line with all the other requirements, that you can't walk through the bar to get to the bathroom, that you have, that it's identified, the area is identified, that it can be closed off as a bar, or that, when the hours are over, the liquor can be put away and it's considered a bar. So in a true fashion, a retail location with a bar. This is in response to the situations with the convenience stores and the gas stations having essentially a retail license, which would have them operate like a bar, but without a specific designated area as a bar that we can control, that we can enforce. Mr. Speaker, the concern about the package licenses near churches, etc. This is certainly something that we have concerns about. It is part of what is coming in the further revisions, but even earlier, I stated that notwithstanding the amendments which will allow package licenses to sell on Sunday for consumption off premises, I went on to say that it is a social responsibility of the board to consider factors that are in the best interest of the public, including but not limited to the potential impact of the premises on the antisocial activities in the locality, the management strategies to minimize the impact and potential impact of premises on vandalism, litter, criminal acts, etc. We plan, Mr. Speaker, to give the board a bit more teeth in the revision coming, to look at whether areas are adequately serviced, where they are in location to churches, to schools, seniors, etc. The member from Savannah brought up the issue with the liquor store in his district years ago. We've had a few instances like that where the board have actually turned down the licenses on the very broad section that speaks to the best interest of the public, only to have them overturned by the appeal because it's not clear enough what that best interest of the public is. So we want to give the board a bit more strength in making that decision in the revisions that are to come. Mr. Speaker, I think that speaking to the Minister from Northside about the antisocial behavior, I covered that, and we certainly will also undertake to include that in our revisions. I will also undertake to speak with the board and the enforcement team in this revision as well. We've given the enforcement team a bit more teeth and ability to enforce and ticket. But we'll certainly see what we can do, and the idea of perhaps a distance. There were, in the old days, being a bar owner myself, there were rules that we all abided by that some were unwritten, and you just agreed that this was the case and you didn't allow it to happen. Things have changed, unfortunately or fortunately, it depends on how you look at it. So we'll be happy to have a closer look at that and see what we can do immediately from an enforcement perspective and later on from a legislative perspective. Mr. Speaker, the member from Northside also inquired about Section 9.1, I think it was, with the exits and the fire extinguishers and the lights. So, Mr. Speaker, that is covered in the inspections for the fire department. It doesn't exclude, because it is required in the law, so it doesn't exclude from the inspectors, the DCI inspectors, from inspecting as well. But one of the things we are also planning to do is to not restrict the inspections to just those 14 days before the renewal date every year. What we hope to do is to allow the different departments, the planning, fire, plumbing, everyone to do their inspections throughout the year unannounced, and not just in that 14-day period that everybody rushes to get their inspections done. We've gotten to the point now where the agencies actually can't handle the volume of work that as a result of these inspections having to be done annually prior to the AGM. So we hope to give the agencies the responsibility, leave the responsibility with them, and to have them schedule their inspections randomly throughout the year. And as long as the applicant has had an inspection, if the inspection was just after or close to a year old, the board will have the ability to require the applicant to request an inspection at that time to ensure that they're still up to code. But I agree with the member from Northside. Having experience in that industry, I would get a spike of sales every year prior to renewals, where everybody had to do everything from change ceiling tiles to buying new shelves, etc. And they could have had those old shelves for 10 months, or they could have been breaking the law for 11 months, and they fixed it. So if the inspections are done randomly and without appointment, then people will have to maintain their premises in throughout the year in abidance with the law. The member from Northside also asked for some clarification in Section 10, 4A and B. Sorry, Mr. Speaker, one moment, please. Mr. Speaker, it's getting to the end here, but on the member's question on section 9, I think it's subsection 3. Where it says a package license permits the disposal of intoxicating liquor in sealed containers by retail for consumption off the licensed premises, but does not permit disposal to another licensee for the purpose of disposal by him under the terms of his license. That is written in there, Mr. Speaker, because no, this is in the current law. You have the bill? You have the bill handy? We did change it in the bill. Okay. The bill, you have the green bill? Where in the, sorry, Mr. Speaker, if the member from Northside, where in the bill, well, so when if a person has a package license, it is intended for them to sell retail to be consumed off premises, Mr. Speaker. The distributor's license is a license that a person would need to have if they're going to sell to another licensee for them to dispense of it or dispose of it under their license. So, because it's a clarification in licenses. I think there is a fee difference. So if someone were to get smart to become a distributor and just get a retail license. Right. But unfortunately, those are the ones that are licensed under the law to do that, and they create, it's a part of the commerce of the industry. So, Mr. Speaker, I think I covered section 4:7 about the restaurant. Mr. Mr. Speaker, the amendment is that a restaurant license is broadened to permit the disposal of liquor to any person if it is consumed on the premises and food is served on the premises. Mr. Speaker, currently the law stipulates that one must purchase and consume food in order to consume alcoholic beverages at a restaurant. Because there are some restaurant licenses that were able to, some had restaurant license with the bar license. Right. So if you have a bar in there, yes. Yes. So that fixes it, that you don't have that disparity between the two. The- Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to discuss it further with the member, and we can have a look at it at committee stage. I think there is just a need for, if we're going to do that, then we would have to remove the wholesaler's license. So, but we'd be happy to discuss it. So, Mr. Speaker, again, as I said, thank the members for their comments. We certainly will take the time to take them on board, and I appreciate the cooperation by the different partners in the review of this bill and dealing with these issues. Again, I'd like to thank the government for their support, thank my team for their hard work over the last couple of months on this, the legal drafting team as well, as we put them under pressure to get it done on time, and for all members who helped contribute to the discussions today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Liquor Licensing Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
The Music and Dancing Control Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honourable Minister of Commerce.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Music and Dancing Control Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the member wish to speak thereto?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill seeks to modernize the music and dancing control law. It seeks to exempt public performances of music and dance given primarily for artistic, cultural, or religious purposes, and permit music and dancing at the airport or in port areas on Sundays in order to welcome tourists to the island. It also seeks to provide for the waiver of fees for certain licenses granted for events that are part of a national festival of the Cayman Islands, and for the enforcement of the law by the trade officers and the directors of the Department of Commerce and Investment, as well as the Commissioner of Police. Sarge, please. Just makes it easy. Of particular importance, Mr. Speaker, this bill also seeks to resolve an issue that caused significant concern to the tourism industry last December when New Year's Eve fell on a Sunday. Mr. Speaker, these amendments are in response to many discussions between government and stakeholders concerning this matter. Representation was made directly to my ministry by the Cayman Islands Tourism Association, who, in voicing their grievance, articulated the effect the restriction on music and dancing has had on many businesses, particularly those in the service and hospitality sector. Mr. Speaker, in an effort to consult as widely as possible and with all persons that these amendments would impact, I again also met with the Cayman Ministers Association and the National Drug Council, to name a few. My colleagues in Cabinet and I listened to the concerns expressed by all parties, and we have considered the options available under the law to remedy the situation. Mr. Speaker, the proposed bill takes into account the views from all sectors, and the amendments are intended to satisfy the current economic demands and better accommodate the tourism industry without distressing our island's Christian principles and traditions. Mr. Speaker, while this bill is not a comprehensive review of the entire law, it does seek to resolve the most pressing and reoccurring issues. As I previously stated, a much more extensive reassessment of the law is required to address the remaining areas of concern. So to address the clauses in the bill, Mr. Speaker, Clause 2, Mr. Speaker, seeks to amend the references in the law to the liquor license law to update the citation of that law. Clause 3, Mr. Speaker, seeks to amend the definition of exempted premises and deletes the definition of permitted days, moving the substance of these definitions into sections 2A and 3(1) of the law, respectively. Mr. Speaker, this amendment seeks to expand exempted premises to bring it up to date with premises that are utilized by the public for functions given primarily for artistic, cultural, and religious purposes. The clause, Mr. Speaker, also amends the definition of permitted hours and adds definitions for occasional licenses, temporary license, and trade officers. Clause 4, Mr. Speaker, inserts a new section into the law which lists the premises which are exempt from the control of music and dancing. The clause expands the existing exemptions to include community centers, theaters, churches, schools, parks, and public squares where public performances of music and dance are given primarily for artistic, cultural, or religious purposes. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to highlight that this amendment is necessary as the law does not include specific wording exempting churches or other religious establishments from having live music and dancing, not even for the church services on Sunday. It was important, Mr. Speaker, to establish that these premises are included in the definition of exempted premises, as we want to ensure that our Christian traditions are protected under the law. Mr. Speaker, Clause 5 seeks to amend Section 3 to prohibit music and dancing on Good Friday, Christmas Day, and Sunday, except where the music or dancing is in a hotel or restaurant at the airport or in port areas, is played between the hours of 9 a.m. and 11:45 p.m., and is not in excess of prescribed noise levels. Mr. Speaker, there is currently no provision in the law that allows music, for example, keyboard or a steel pan player, at the airport or port areas on prohibited days. This amendment would allow music in order to welcome arriving passengers, as long as the music is not played in excess of prescribed noise levels. It will also allow hotels to have welcome receptions and cater to conferences and their guests on prohibited days. Mr. Speaker, this particular amendment is being proposed in an effort to maintain our position as a tourist destination of choice while not jeopardizing our Cayman culture and experience. Clause 5, Mr. Speaker, also authorizes the board to permit music and dancing when New Year's Eve falls on a Saturday or Sunday. Mr. Speaker, this amendment seeks to address the issue, like the one we had that just occurred in last December, when New Year's Eve fell on a Saturday or Sunday. It will give the board the discretion, where it is satisfied that it is in the public's interest to do so, to permit dancing or the playing of music in licensed premises on a Sunday where New Year's Eve falls on a Saturday, or on a Sunday during such hours and subject to such conditions as the board may determine in each particular case. Mr. Speaker, there are committee stage amendments that will specify the hours to which the board can permit dancing or the playing of music on Sundays. I will address these during the committee stages, sir. Clause 6 seeks to amend Section 9 in consequence of the deletion of the definition of permitted days and the amendment to the definition of permitted hours by Clause 3. Clause 7 seeks to amend Section 11 in the consequence of the insertion of a new Section 11A into the law by Clause 8. Clause 8 inserts new sections 11A and 11B into the law, providing for the enforcement of the law by the trade officers, the Commissioner of Police, and the Director of the Department of Commerce and Investment. The clause gives these officers, the Commissioner and the Director, the same powers, privileges, and immunities as they have under the Liquor Licensing Law 2016 revision. Mr. Speaker, currently the trade officers that report to the Director of the Department of Commerce and Investment are not recognized under this law. This amendment will give these officers all powers, privileges, rights, and immunities of a constable when carrying out their duties under this law. It should be noted that the trade officers and the directors of the Department of Commerce and Investment already have a very close working relationship with the Royal Cayman Islands Police Service. Mr. Speaker, Clause 8 also adds a new section 11C to the law, which makes it an offense to obstruct a trade officer, the commissioner, or the director. Clause 9, Mr. Speaker, seeks to amend Section 12 to permit the board to waive fees for an occasional license for music or dancing that takes place as part of a national festival of the island. Mr. Speaker, in the past, there have been a number of waivers requests received by the board. However, the current law does not provide the board with the powers to waive the fees. This amendment will address this issue to provide for waiver of fees for events that are deemed of national importance, such as Pirates Week, where the board is satisfied that it is in the best public interest to do so. The board can waive in whole or in part the fees required to be paid for an occasional license permitting music or dancing at an event that is part of a national festival of these islands. So previously, Mr. Speaker, as happened in last Pirates Week, the Ministry of District Administration and Tourism had to write a check to my ministry, to the Department of Commerce and Investment, to pay for a liquor license for the Pirates Week Festival. There was no other way to do it. This clause will seek to amend that. Clause 10 seeks to amend Section 14 to give the regulations making power to Cabinet rather than the Governor and Cabinet, in line with the 2009 Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the clause also gives Cabinet the power to prescribe noise levels and methods and machines for measuring noise. Cabinet will have the power to make regulations for the purpose of the administration of this law, including prescribing noise levels measured in decibels. It will also recognize methods of measurement of noise and machines for measuring the level of noise, as these, although currently in use, are not recognized in the law. So, Mr. Speaker, we have received some recommendations that have arisen during the 21-day consultation period, and we will certainly be addressing these during the committee stage amendments. Mr. Speaker, we feel that this bill will address the critical issues in the current Music and Dancing Control Law 2012 revision. As I said earlier, perhaps for the fourth time, a much more comprehensive review in consultation with all relevant stakeholders in which we will take a closer look at the law and its functionality, is planned for the longer term. In an effort to make things more efficient and easier to monitor, the review will also look at potentially combining the music and dancing control law and the liquor licensing law, as the licensing board for both laws are the same. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I therefore commend the Music and Dancing Control Amendment Bill 2018 to this honorable House for passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? The Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Through you, Mr. Speaker, I just rise to say that we support the legislation, but I have some concerns with the clause 5 that amends section 3 and the new section 3, where it says, notwithstanding subsection 1C, a board may, where satisfied that it is in the public interest to do so, permit dancing. The minister might haven't listened to the minister the last time and talk about the court overturning it because of that phrase. You might want to consider deleting in the public interest to do so, because the situation could actually arise where certain facilities on this end of the island could be permitted, but they may determine that it's not possible, not in the public interest to do it on the north side. And I don't think the board should have that choice. I think that the amendment should simply say, notwithstanding subsection 1C, the board may permit dancing or the playing of music on New Year's Eve only when it occurs on Saturday or Sunday. I don't think we should give the board the discretion to approve some places and not approve others. And I think that could be the effect of that. I would be happy if you deleted that discretion of the board.
Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the mover to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I take the member from the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, member from Northside's view. We do have an amendment for that for the committee stages, clearly defining that, and we're happy to look at it to define it even further. And thank all the members of this honorable House for their tacit support.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Music and Dancing Control Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The bill, Music and Dancing Control Amendment Bill 2018, is given a second reading.
The Cadet Corps Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honourable Minister of Education, Youth Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move a bill for a law to amend the Cadet Corps Law 2016.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the Honourable Mover wish to speak thereto?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Cayman Islands Cadet Corps is a youth development organization established to instill in cadets spiritual, moral, national, and humane values that include honesty, justice, discipline, and social responsibility. The Cadet Corps is also to encourage leadership and the ability to work as a team while maximizing self-respect, self-confidence, and self-reliance among the cadets. Mr. Speaker, its programs accommodates young people from age 11 to age 18 years of age. The Cadet Corps is governed, as you would know, by the Cadet Corps Law 2016 revision. Among its provisions, Mr. Speaker, the law establishes in Section 27 a Cadet Corps committee for the following purposes. A, advising the minister on matters of policy relating to the Cadet Corps. B, advising the commandant on such matters as referred to the committee by the minister or the commandant. C, making recommendations with respect to the appointment to and withdrawal of commissions. And by commissions, I mean commission officers are those at the rank of the second lieutenant and above. D, making recommendation with respect to promotions. And E, advising the minister on the establishment of new units and the regulation of the strength of established units. Mr. Speaker, in July 2016, the Cadet Corps law was consolidated and revised, and in 2016, the version of the law was gazetted on September of the said year. In that revision, Mr. Speaker, the appointment of the membership of the Cadet Corps Committee and the appointment of the chair and vice chair was transferred from the governor in cabinet to the governor. These changes are seen to be an anomaly, as previous appointments to the committee had been carried out by cabinet. Mr. Speaker, therefore, the amendments as put for this Honourable House today have been made to the law, which will allow for the appointment of the Cadet Corps Committee and its chair and vice chair to be made by the said cabinet. By virtue of Section 27, Mr. Speaker, of the Cadet Corps 2016 revision, it also requires that the chair vacate office at the end of 3 years from his or her appointment as chair. By amending this section of the law, we are thereby removing the existing term limit for the position of chair of the committee. Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons this amendment we believe is necessary is that the Cadet Committee is now in the process of a more comprehensive review of the cadet law with a view of making it a more effective organization and to bring it in line with the existing legislation such as the Public Sector Management Law. The current provision, Mr. Speaker, has also been seen as unnecessary, limits the power on cabinet on appointing who the chair would be. Mr. Speaker, for continuity purposes, therefore, it is desirous to continue with the leadership of the committee so that the work that they have now undertaken may continue. I trust that these changes, Mr. Speaker, to the Cadet Corps law will strengthen the existing administration of the Cadet Corps, which positively shapes the lives of the young people of these beloved Cayman Islands, and I would ask all members to lend their support to this short but important amendment. May it please you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to join my good friend from the eastern side of Cayman and Little Cayman in making changes to the Cadet Corps law. And totally agree with her that it makes it much more flexible and less onerous on trying to find chairman next 3 years and the likes.
I agree.
But to implore her, as I've done every member of these hallowed halls since the creation of this Cadet Corps, to vest in the Cadet Corps some crown properties somewhere so they can develop, work it on their own. There's lots of crown properties in the East End, lots of it all over this country, in order that they can do their own thing and find a home of their own. Because since its inception, the hope was that this would broaden its scope eventually, and we could use it to develop our youth, not only those with the academic capabilities, but others through, I don't want to say military disciplines, but something close to that, like the Scouts were to many of us. And I believe that is what we need. And 20, 30 acres of property, and let them go in there and do their own thing. And government contribute a few dollars, and they get donations from people, sponsors, and they have. What he going on with now again? Okay. Well, peppercorn lease or something like that. But you always try and help me. Yeah. What he needs to remember is that the first rule of digging a hole is to put the shovel down, because you got to dig deeper. It goes deeper if you keep the shovel in your hand.
Who are you talking to?
Mr. Speaker, I like I said, there are a number of lots of land in East End, and I think we had an inventory recently because of the EY report on divesting some years ago. Find 30 acres up there, and like the Premier said, peppercorn lease it to the Cadet Corps. If we need to change the law to say that they can own and dispose of and rent and lease, then we do it. But we need that for those. You know, that'll be part of their discipline to develop their own place. Yes, Mr. Speaker, I know you're waving that bill at me. But, Mr. Speaker, I thought that was necessary. In addition to making sure the chairman stays in place more than 3 years for the development of our youth. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, does the Honorable Minister wish to wind up?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd first like to thank the Honourable Member from the District of East End for his contribution, and all other members for their tacit support. I wish to inform the Honourable Member from East End that leading out of the reason of asking for the expansion or the removal of the restriction of the 3-year term was that I'm fortunate enough to have a very professional and very knowledgeable, experienced past judge who was a cadet during his tenure, and was able to speak with him and persuade him to continue on with the Cadet Corps. They have already been meeting just as a steering committee to give advice, because that's basically what the function advice to the minister. And of course, those of you that know me know I like to purchase land, because most of our Caymanians can't afford to do it nowadays, and wherever I can find a hole in government to purchase land for the benefit of the people in Crown ownership, and a member from North, I would like that emphasis. I try to do so. I said Crown ownership. I won't get pulled into that debate, Mr. Speaker. But I can say for the members' sake that we have been looking at the Crown property as one of it. They identified that they needed to expand the marine unit. My government has been instrumental in providing a boat for them to be able to start the expansion of this curriculum. And we're not just looking in East End. Obviously, I'm from Cayman, and you would not be surprised that I've also looked at Crown property on the BRAC for the cadets, because they've been having to go to places like Jamaica and Barbados to do some of the wider exploratory and experimental training. So that is the direction that they're going. So I'm happy to hear that we're on the same hymn sheet for that. And I thank him very much for taking the time to think it through and to share the vision of the government in that respect. Mr. Speaker, it only leaves for me to say that I'm looking forward to the expeditious passing of this very small amendment, but one that will have a colossal impact on the operation of the Cadet Corps, and that they are actually listening in the wings to see what the House will do with it today, because they want to move forward with it. We believe that, as it was originally envisioned, the Cadet Corps can be a place that can move on to the police force, the Marine unit, and even help in the hurricane exercises. We've seen that the UK have sent at least once, if I'm not mistaken, to do exercises here. There's no reason where they could not go to where Caymanians came from and become operational, either whether through a Coast Guard or through the operations for the during the times of hurricanes. I've met with these young people on many, many occasions, and despite what the general public thinks, Mr. Speaker, they're not those young people that just fall through the various social stratifications of our community, but they're very bright and disciplined young people, and the future bodes well with them. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that a bill entitled the Cadet Corps Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the ayes have it. The Cadet Corps Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Disaster Preparedness and Hazard Management Amendment Bill 2018, second reading.
The Honorable Minister of Financial Services, Home Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled the Disaster Preparedness and Hazard Management Amendment Bill 2018, hereinafter referred to as the bill.
The bill has been duly moved. Does the mover wish to speak thereto?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to present this bill on behalf of the government. This bill seeks to improve the current provisions for disaster preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. And Mr. Speaker, just very briefly to give some brief context to the bill, which I'm sure many of you, if not all of us, are familiar with the need to develop and establish a Department of Disaster Preparedness and Hazard Management, the Hazard Management Cayman Islands, that is. Since its inception in January 2007, this was the government agency responsible for the coordination of all the programs dealing with national disasters. However, it did take almost 10 years later to actually achieve the bill, or what is now law, the Disaster Preparedness and Hazard Management Law 2016. Nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, this bill is, in the view of the government, it is needed because current membership of both the National Hazard Management Executive and Council excludes some key participants, and it is felt that this bill will address and strengthen these critical decision-making bodies. Mr. Speaker, the bill also seeks to ensure that investments that this government has made to establish a national emergency notification system, phase 1 of which will be implemented fully by the end of this month, can be utilized and efficiently and effectively to provide early warning broadcasts to the public, particularly in the face of sudden onset events like tsunamis and earthquakes. And Mr. Speaker, just to briefly give the members of the listening public as well as members in this chamber the early warning and notification system certainly was brought, or the need for such was brought into stark view following the Sol fire and the January earthquake off of Honduras, where the Cayman Islands were briefly placed on the tsunami watch. After that point, or it was as a result of those experiences, a sudden onset notification chart was developed by Hazard Management, and meetings were held with the Government Information Services, Department of Tourism, from the notification to the tourism sector, as well as the Department of Public Safety and Communications. So, Mr. Speaker, procedures have been established to ensure that going forward, urgent communications capacity is more robust and responsive for sudden onset events, particularly those that occur outside normal office hours, on those, over the weekend, during the nighttime hours, etc. And of course, this process is important, Mr. Speaker, as the government continues the ongoing process of developing this national emergency notification system. And phase 1, as I have indicated, that will be completed by the end of June, involves the implementation of the radio interrupt, so the simultaneous radio interrupt capability. Mr. Speaker, this project commenced in March of this year, and as I said, is being tested and will be fully operational by the end of June. And it is anticipated that phase 2, which would involve the implementation of a similar broadcast system to place, crawling text on all the cable television channels, is currently being discussed with local TV providers. And at this stage, the indication is all of whom are supportive of the initiative. Again, Mr. Speaker, the phase 3 and the final phase in this rollout process is to look at the implementation of solutions for cell broadcast messaging and the mass SMS text, among other solutions. Hopefully in the near future, Mr. Speaker, the ministry is working certainly along with the Hazard Management Cayman Islands, the Department of Public Safety and Communications, OFREG, and other stakeholders. They are currently in discussions about the best way to determine the way forward in order to achieve this. As I said, certainly the expectation of the government is that this is done in short and timely order. But, Mr. Speaker, so the amendment to this particular bill will help to make sure that the intention of having such an early notification system is actually able to be executed in the event of these sudden onset activities. Mr. Speaker, the bill also proposes to provide the necessary legal framework to support the National Disaster Fund, which was established in this Honourable House by way of motion, I believe, in 1999 to support disaster preparedness, response, mitigation, and recovery. So looking specifically, Mr. Speaker, at some of the clauses, Mr. Speaker, of course, Clause 1 sets out the short title. Clause 2 of the bill amends Section 2 of the principal law by amending the definition of the word ministry. It seeks to define ministry as not necessarily being ministry with responsibility for home affairs, but it's recognized that the ministry's names can change with changing administrations. So therefore, the definitional change is to define ministry as a ministry with responsibility for the Department of Hazard Management, Cayman Islands, which, as I said, Mr. Speaker, is now a recognized department by law. And this change aims to kind of future-proof any particular changes that may occur to government administrations in the future by just defining the ministry to be that minister that has been given the constitutional responsibility for that particular department. Mr. Speaker, Clause 3 of the bill inserts a new section into the principal law, Section 4A, which establishes in law the National Disaster Fund and enables the utilization of that fund. Honourable members, as I said, those of you that may have been around at the time would be aware that the decision was taken in Finance Committee on the 26th of April, 1999, to establish this fund for the purpose of, quote, dealing with and recovering from a national disaster, end quote. Mr. Speaker, since then, the ministry has been advised by the Honorable Financial Secretary that the $400,000 that was contained in that particular motion when the fund was established has been invested into the fund annually. We were, however, advised that there was no reference to existing legislation for this fund, and so the intended purpose, or the fact that it was to be funded annually. And so, Mr. Speaker, obviously, having seen the devastation sustained by our sister territories in the region, that being Anguilla, Turks and Caicos, and BVI, during the last hurricane season, and being aware of the fact that this was compounded due to the lack of access to adequate resources in the immediate aftermath for some of those territories, which severely hampered early recovery efforts, the government identified the need to ensure that this annual investment in our National Disaster Fund continue, and that cash on deposit be available and accessible in the event that we find ourselves in a similar situation going forward. Mr. Speaker, Clause 4 amends Section 6 of the Principal Law to provide that the report of the Director is required to include a summary of the manner in which the monies from the National Disaster Fund were utilized to ensure that there is transparency with respect to the utilization of the fund. Clause 5 amends Section 8 of the Principal Law to ensure that the National Emergency Notification System operates in accordance with the requirements of the Information and Communication Technology Law 2017 revision, as the current law refers to the Information and Communication Authority Law 2011 revision. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to this update, provision is also being made in Section 8 for an exception to the need for prior written approval from either the governor or the chairman of the Management Council, that being the deputy governor, to make an announcement using the National Emergency Notification System in the event of a sudden onset event like a tsunami or earthquake. Of course, Mr. Speaker, in such instances when every second counts, it is essential that we utilize the technology that we have invested in to provide the public with as much warning as possible in the event of these sudden onset situations. And so, Mr. Speaker, it would not be practical or sensible to suggest that during such a time that it would take to then receive the prior written approval for the broadcast notification. That in itself, kind of defeats the purpose of having this ability to have this immediate notification. So whilst prior approval for such broadcasts would not be required under such circumstances, the content of the messages for the various incidents, including tsunamis and earthquakes, the intention is that there would be some standard language that has already been pre-approved and developed in anticipation that if we ever have to use it, that there would already be, the kind of framework in place to ensure standardization, to which specific details obviously can be added very quickly, thereby enabling swift notification to the public. And so the governor or the deputy governor will be notified as soon as possible after such broadcast has been made. And Mr. Speaker, there is a committee stage amendment, which we will discuss at that time, to this section as well. Clause 6 amends Section 14 of the Principal Law by substituting the words "the schedule" with the word "Schedule 1." And this is necessary to include, obviously, because there is an additional schedule going forward. Clause 7 of the bill amends the schedule of the Principal Law. And in Part A, which refers to the National Hazard Management Executive, Paragraph 3 contains a list of members to be amended, which refers to, again, just making sure the name change tracks the reference ministry, so it would be the chief officer with responsibility for the Department of Hazard Management, as well as in Part B, it refers to the National Hazard Management Council. The change also is reflected there. intention for the Hazard Management Executive Committee also would include all members of cabinet, all ministers, to be a part of that executive as well. And the council, the Hazard Management Council, is broadened to include the Director of the Department of Public Safety and Communications, as the Office of Telecommunications no longer exists. It also includes the Director of Prisons, is added to this council as well, given obviously the role that the prison plays with respect to public safety, especially during the times of a national disaster. And so, Mr. Speaker, Clause 8 of the new schedule in the principal law deals with the sources of monies that will comprise the National Disaster Fund. And as I said, the fund started with the initial contribution of $400,000 annually, and it was further agreed that earnings from interest and dividends on investment would be retained for future accrual within this fund, and also the provisions in the new Schedule 2 make it possible for additional funding to be made available through appropriations from the revenue borrowings or other funds from the government or of the government in accordance with the Public Management and Finance Law, as well as any surplus budget in the annual budget allocation of the Department of Hazard Management Cayman Islands at the end of the year end, and also recognizes whatever contributions that the government may receive from other individuals, organizations, or governments in the event that we are needing of such contribution in the face of a disaster. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, there are a few committee stage amendments which we will address at that time, and this concludes my presentation of the bill as proposed, and I would like to commend it to the House for second reading.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wish to speak, does the Honourable Minister wish to?
Just, Mr. Speaker, in saying, thank you to everyone in here for your tacit support. Obviously, the members in this chamber would have participated in the briefing that the ministry had for all MLAs most recently, and I want to thank those MLAs that were able to make it, and those that weren't able to make it and did indicate as such. We certainly are looking forward to working with you if, in the event that we have to, and hopefully we won't have to, but just to say that, the letter that I sent to all MLAs as minister responsible for this area, given that we are now under the new single member dispensation, we certainly, and Hazard Management Cayman Islands has been instructed to work very closely with the individual representatives in the event that there is the need to develop stronger preparation and, in the end, if needed, response, mitigation, and recovery efforts. And we certainly thank the members of this Honourable House for accepting that responsibility in that sense.
Thank
and
you.
also want to thank the staff of the ministry and relevant members of the National Disaster Management Team and the Legislative Drafting Department for their tireless efforts with respect to the design and preparation of this bill.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Disaster Preparedness and Hazard Management Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it. The Disaster Preparedness and Hazard Management Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Electricity Sector Regulation Amendment Bill 2018, second reading. Electricity Sector.
Honorable the Premier.
No, electricity.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for your indulgence. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled Electricity Sector Regulation Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. There's the Honorable Premier speaking.
Mr. Speaker, Clause 2 of the bill seeks to repeal and replace Section 92 of the Principal Law concerning conflict of laws to ensure that electricity sector regulation law is subject to the Public Authorities Law 2017. Mr. Speaker, that is the sole objective of this small amendment, and I'm pleased to recommend the Electricity Sector Amendment Bill 2018 and request the support and approval for its successful passage by all members of this Honorable House.
The member wish to speak? If not, I'll put the question. The question is that a bill, does the Premier wish to say anything further?
Only to thank all members for what is now becoming customary, their support and cooperation with respect to these matters.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Electricity Sector Regulation Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The Electricity Sector Regulation Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Water Sector Regulation Amendment Bill 2018, second reading.
The Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of the Water Sector Regulation Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Clause 2 of the bill seeks to amend paragraph 5(7) of the schedule to the principal law by deleting after the word procedures the words "and ultimately be reviewable by the Grand Court in the last resort." The current wording in the principal law does not properly provide for appeals to the Grand Court and Court of Appeal, and sufficient and proper provision for appeals is already provided for in Section 91, subsection 11, and 92 of the overarching regulatory law, the Utility Regulation and Competition Law. Mr. Speaker, with simply that amendment proposed, I am pleased to commend the Water Sector Amendment Bill 2018 to this Honorable House and to request the support and approval of all members for its successful passage.
Does any other member wish to speak? If not, does the Premier wish to say anything further?
Again, Mr. Speaker, only to thank all members of the House for their tacit support.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Water Sector Regulation Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The Water Sector Regulation Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Water Charter Amendment Bill 2018, second reading.
Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of the Water Authority Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill is duly moved as the Premier is speaking there too.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Public Authorities Law commenced on the 1st of June 2017. The bill seeks primarily to make certain provisions in the Water Authority Law consistent with the Public Authorities Amendment, the Public Authorities Law.
Clause 2 of the amendment bill seeks to amend the principal law to increase the membership of the board to a minimum of 8, while restricting the number of public sector members to 3. This would bring the percentage of public servants in line with the requirements of the Public Authorities Law, which provides that a board shall not be comprised of more than 40% public or civil servants. Clause 3 seeks to amend the principal law to remove Cabinet as the appointing authority for the director and confers this responsibility on the board, and deletes the current provision for the director to act as the secretary to the board. Clause 4 seeks to amend the schedule to the principal law to, among other things, insert provisions related to the termination of the appointment of a member appointed by Cabinet. These provisions are consistent with Section 11 of the Public Authorities Law. Clause 8 seeks to provide for the validity and continuation of the appointment of the director made prior to the commencement of the Public Authorities Law. Clause 6 is a validation clause. It seeks to provide that any acts, decisions, or proceedings of the board that were carried out prior to the commencement of this law shall not be invalid by reason only of those acts, decisions, or proceedings being inconsistent with the Public Authorities Law 2017. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to recommend the Water Authority Amendment Bill 2018 and to request the support and approval for its successful passage by all members of this Honorable House.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, the member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I could not let the Premier go without. Mr. Speaker, and I believe it is in most of them, and if he can just tell us, then we wouldn't need any other. Most of them speaks of, okay, let me get the proper wording, that it's the indemnity sections that we're putting in, which enacts decisions or proceedings of the board that were carried out prior to the commencement of this law shall not be invalid by reason only of those acts, decisions, or proceedings being inconsistent with the Public Authorities Law. And then I think it's in the other one that it says that it's not inconsistent with the negligence on negligence. And no, that's not this one, but there are others that has it in. And we were talking about the possibility of doing that recently. Right. So those were that was one of the concerns that we had with regards to that negligence area. I think we did that when we were bringing for instance, some of them are saying where there is any inconsistency between this law and any other law, this law shall prevail to the extent of inconsistency subject to, inconsistency, but the Attorney General promised that we were going to, instead of issuing indemnities to these boards, that they were going to amend the laws.
So the Public Authorities Amendment Law is coming next.
Right. Will will that cover these other laws? Okay, okay.
If no other member wishes to speak, Honorable Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the point which the member made, I don't think is actually raised by the provisions to which he referred, which is, as he correctly said, is included in all of these bills. The whole point of that section is simply to say that merely because an act, decision, or proceeding of the board carried out prior to the commencement of this law, that is the amendment law, will not be considered invalid by reason only of those acts, decisions, or proceedings being inconsistent with the public authorities law. The bigger point he's making about whether or not to indemnify board members for acts, omissions, or negligence is something that is addressed in the amendment to the proposed amendment to the public authorities law itself, to which the acting deputy governor will speak when she moves that amendment shortly. No. So we don't need to put it in these. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his contribution in raising that point, and thank all other members for their tacit support.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Water Authority Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against, the ayes have it. The Water Authority Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Conditional Release Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honorable the Acting Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, I beg the leave of the Honorable House to move the second reading of a bill, the long title of which is entitled the Conditional Release Amendment Bill 2018, which seeks to amend the current law to make provisions for the appointment of a temporary chairperson, the removal of a board member for non-attendance at meetings, the board to be able to reconsider a decision to release a prisoner on license where the board has received new information, a whole life tariff in special circumstances, and for incidental and connected purposes.
The bill is duly moved. Does the member wish to speak thereto?
Yes, with your leave, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Conditional Release Law 2014 was fully enacted on 1st of February 2016 to replace the parole provisions of the prison law. These proposed amendments will help to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the operations of the board. Mr. Speaker, Clause 2 seeks to amend Section 4 of the principal law to make provisions for the appointment of a member to act as the chairperson when the chairperson and vice chairperson are unable to preside at a meeting. It also provides for the removal of a member where that member has been absent for 3 consecutive meetings. Mr. Speaker, Clause 3 seeks to insert a new provision. It proposes that in instances where there has been a material change in relation to a prisoner prior to the release of a prisoner on license, the board will be permitted to reconvene and hear the prisoner in relation to the material change. The board may, upon hearing, set aside its previous order or vary that order. Mr. Speaker, the decision to release a prisoner is made approximately 1 month before the actual release on license. This proposed amendment, if approved, would enable the board to postpone the release of a prisoner if there is a material change in circumstances, including but not limited to receiving information that has not previously been known to the board. Mr. Speaker, Clause 4 seeks to amend Section 14 of the law to provide for a whole life tariff in special circumstances. The whole life tariff would apply where the offense involved multiple murders, the murder of a child, a murder for political, religious, racial, or ideological reasons, or in the case of a prisoner who has been previously convicted of murder. The proposed amendments to Section 14 are as follows. By inserting after subsection 1 the following subsection, 1A. Notwithstanding subsection 1 and any other law to the contrary, where any of the following circumstances are present, A, the murder of 2 or more persons, where each murder involves any of the following: 1, a substantial degree of premeditation or planning; 2, the abduction of a victim; or 3, sexual or sadistic conduct. B, the murder of a child, where the murder also involves the abduction of a child or sexual or sadistic conduct. C, a murder done for the purposes of advancing a political, religious, racial, or ideological motivation. Or D, a murder by an offender previously convicted of murder. The court shall, when sentencing a prisoner to a term of imprisonment for life, specify the period of incarceration the prisoner shall serve before the prisoner is eligible to be considered for conditional release on license, the period being such as the court considers appropriate to satisfy requirements of retribution, deterrence, and rehabilitation. The period shall be whole life before the prisoner is eligible for conditional release unless there are extenuating circumstances, exceptional in nature, in which case the court may impose a lower period of incarceration. And B, by repealing subsection 2 and substituting the following subsection. In making a decision under subsection 1A or subsection B or 1A, the court shall state the extenuating circumstance or the aggravating circumstances as the case may be. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to commend the Conditional Release Amendment Bill 2018 and hereby request the support of all members of this honorable House for its approval and passage.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, the Honorable Mover wishes to reply or speak further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to express my gratitude to the members of this honorable House for their tacit support and approval.
The question is that the bill shortly entitled the Conditional Release Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no. The ayes have it. The Conditional Release Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Trade Union Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honorable the Minister of Financial Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill shortly entitled the Trade Union Amendment Bill 2018, hereinafter referred to as the bill.
The bill has been duly moved. Is the member speaking thereto?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to present this bill on behalf of the government. The bill seeks to remove the obligation placed on the Cabinet to approve auditors for trade unions. Mr. Speaker, it is the opinion of the government that the provision requiring Cabinet approval of auditors for trade unions is outdated and actually inconsistent with the existing registration and regulatory oversight of accountants and auditors provided under the Accountants Law 2016. Mr. Speaker, since the Trade Union Law 1998 revision, the Cayman Islands has developed distinct legislation, this being the Accountants Law 2016, to provide for an overarching regulatory framework for accountants and audit firms. Under the Accountants Law, the Cayman Islands Institute of Professional Accountants, CIPA for short, is the body responsible for licensing, registration, and discipline procedures. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Section 4.9 of the Proceeds of Crime Law 2018 revision, CIPA has been designated as the self-regulatory body responsible for monitoring the compliance of firms of accountants conducting relevant financial business with the provisions of the Anti-Money Laundering Regulations 2018. Mr. Speaker, in light of the Accountants Law 2016 that recognizes CIPA as the body with the oversight for accountants and auditors, and the subsequent delegation as a self-regulatory body, it is unnecessary for the requirement to remain for Cabinet to approve auditors for trade unions. Finally, Mr. Speaker, this change is supported by CIPA and the General Registry, who acts as the Registrar of Trade Unions pursuant to the Trade Union Law, and it receives the filing of the audit certificates for trade unions. So, Mr. Speaker, the bill therefore proposes to make that change, which will require trade unions to use an auditor which is licensed and registered with CIPA under the Accountants Law 2016 without the requirement for Cabinet approval. Mr. Speaker, very shortly, looking at the actual clauses of the bill, Clause 1 is the short title. Clause 2 of the bill substitutes the words governor and governor and council with the word cabinet, and Clause 3 of the bill removes the requirement for an auditor to be approved by the governor and provides that the auditor must be registered and licensed under the Accountants Law 2016. Mr. Speaker, this concludes my presentation, and I wish to thank the staff of the Ministry of CIPA, Legislative Drafting, and General Registry for their input in preparing this bill. And I therefore commend the Trade Union Amendment Bill 2018 to this Honourable House for passage.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, the Honourable Mover.
Mr. Speaker, just to say thank the honourable members of this House for your tacit support in making this small but significant amendment. Thank you.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Trade Union Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the ayes have it. The Trade Union Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Whistleblower Protection Amendment Bill 2018.
The Honourable, the Acting Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, I beg the leave of this honorable House to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Whistleblower Protection Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. Is the Honourable Member speaking there too?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Whistleblower Protection Law 2015 applies to all employees and employers in the Cayman Islands. This includes private and public sector employers and employees. The application of this law to both the private and public sectors has always been the policy intent of the law and has been a consistent feature of formal communications regarding the law from its passage in this Honorable House to its enactment in May this year. The fact that this applies to all employees and employers has also been a feature in our local press dating all the way back to June 5th, 2017, when it was covered as such in local press. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, the amendment bill seeks to emphasize the law's application to both the public and private sectors for the avoidance of any doubt. Section 3 of the Whistleblower Protection Law 2015 currently states, for the avoidance of doubt, the law applies to statutory authorities and to government companies. Mr. Speaker, on the basis that this provision could be seen by some as potentially narrowing the scope of the application of the law, the Whistleblower Protection Amendment Bill 2018 seeks to repeal Section 3 and replace it with the following provision in Clause 2 of the bill. For the avoidance of doubt, the law applies to all employees and employers in the islands, including employees and employers of statutory authorities, government-owned companies, or government companies, and private places of employment. Mr. Speaker, the Whistleblower Protection Law was enacted to encourage, help, and protect employees who choose to report improper conduct by their employer. Improper conduct is defined as a criminal offense, a failure to carry out a legal obligation, conduct that has or is likely to result in a miscarriage of justice, be a detrimental action, result in a violation of human rights, result in a threat to health and safety, result in a threat or damage to the environment. Conduct that shows gross mismanagement, impropriety, or misconduct involving public funds, or willful concealment of any act described above. Mr. Speaker, given the nature of the improper conduct contemplated under the Whistleblower Protection Law, I trust that it is self-evident why the government, in approving the law, saw fit to ensure that it applied to all employers and employees in the Cayman Islands in the public and private sectors. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to commend the Whistleblower Protection Amendment Bill 2018, and I humbly request the support and approval of members of this honorable House for its successful passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? The member from Bordentown West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My remarks will be brief. I just think from a matter of clarity to the public, and I hope the Honorable Deputy Governor touches on that during winding up. But one of the things I think that we need to make clear, especially going into the private sector, that while just about every single business on island operate under some law in terms of whether it be the immigration law, the labor law, or whatever, and employees should be protected if they see where laws are being broken to be able to report those laws. I just want to be a little bit careful with regards, especially within the financial industry, where within our own banking laws, there's a certain amount of privacy and everything else that should be afforded to some people. And what I would like to make sure of, especially in sectors that are already regulated by SEMA, where we do have a financial reporting authority and even the Anti-Corruption Commission, that people are not looking at other people's private information and believing somehow that someone is breaking the law based on XYZ. So I think that it's important for us that when we're engaging the public in terms of their cooperation, and it is something I do strongly believe in, that at the end of the day, every citizen has a moral responsibility to ensure that the laws are followed and if they see abuse of any law. But at the same time, we just need to make sure that someone not looking at someone's private business and thinking somehow that maybe someone is breaking a law based on their own perception. Because unfortunately, many people believe that they can read a law and interpret it when that is something that requires a certain amount of training. So I think we just need to make sure and clear with the public, especially when it comes down to privacy, to take. Yeah, so just in terms of that, just to make sure that when they do report information, it's not other people's private information. Outside of that, I think it's needed. I think we do need the public to be vigilant. We do have some very good employers on island. We have some very good businesses on island. But at the same time, we also do recognize that they are the few that can possibly do this jurisdiction both in reputation and everything else. What I'd be curious to know also, Mr. Speaker, is that if there was something that normally trigger, because normally there's some behavior or some action or maybe something that was reported that probably required this change. And if it was something that is basically checked out to be found to be legitimate or something. But at the end of the day, I just want to close by saying that it is something that we are supportive of in principle. It is needed, and I think we need to make sure, as citizens of this country, every single one of us has a responsibility to ensure that our laws are not just followed but also enforced if need be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I'll call on the mover to reply if she wishes to.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd also like to thank the member from Bordentown West for his contributions to this, the deliberations. What I would say in response to the points that were raised was that I think the member, in talking about releasing information that might be of a personal and financial nature, and if they thought that there was something that was untoward there and them taking it into their own hands. I know that there is separate legislation which deals with those matters, if I can recall correctly from my days looking at those issues, specifically how you would make those reports so as not to be tipping off or to be passing that information to through improper channels. There are prescribed channels for that. But this law is really enabling employees to be able to find some comfort in being able to report the wrongdoings of their employers without fear of reprimand or of reprisal. And so the types of things that can be the improper conduct that we were contemplating has been prescribed in the law, but the additional safeguard is that this isn't something that can just be reported broadly. You can't make a report via Facebook and that's a protected disclosure, as it were. So the Office of the Ombudsman is the channel to receive any complaints or any notices of improper conduct, and they can then act as a clearinghouse to ensure that the information that has been received is of a nature that was contemplated by the law, just to make sure that we're not straying outside of the intended purpose. So the additional safeguard here was to make sure that there were persons who were fully versed in the law and its application, who would act as a clearinghouse, and that is to ensure that a balanced approach is taken, but also to make sure that the very thing the law was meant to do, which is to protect the whistleblower, that advice can be given to them if they were potentially getting off track and putting themselves in an area of exposure. So the Office of the Ombudsman would be the persons to receive and deal with those matters. I hope that answers the members' concerns. So with that having been addressed, Mr. Speaker, I would just like to say thank you to the members for their support.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Whistleblower Protection Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The Whistleblower Protection Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Public Authorities Amendment Bill 2018.
The Public Authorities, the Honorable Acting Deputy Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg the leave of this Honorable House to seek to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Public Authorities Amendment Bill 2018, which seeks to provide that a board members, or employee of a public authority shall not be liable in negligence where that board member, or employee in exercising regulatory and, where applicable, monetary, cooperative, or advisory functions or duties, as well as correcting a minor drafting error.
The bill has been the bill has been duly moved, but at this point I'll ask the Premier, since we reached the hour of 4:30.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 10-2 in order that the business of the House may continue beyond the hour of interruption.
The question is that standing orders be suspended in order for the House to continue after the hour of 4:30. All those in favor, please say aye. Those against, the ayes have it. The House will continue. Honorable Deputy Governor.
Mr. Speaker, Clause 2 of the amendment bill seeks to introduce the following new definitions: advisory function, Cayman Islands Monetary Authority, cooperative function, currency reserve, monetary functions, and regulatory function. Of particular note is the fact that in Clause 2, the term regulatory function in relation to a public authority has now been defined as follows. A means the function to regulate and supervise persons in accordance with the law which governs the authority, or B has the meaning assigned to it by the law which governs the authority. Mr. Speaker, the Public Authorities Law 2017 currently provides that a board members, or employee of a public authority shall not be liable in negligence where that board member, or employee is exercising a regulatory function or duties. Clauses 3 and 5 of the bill seek to amend sections 23 subsection 2 and 54 subsection 2 respectively by inserting where applicable before the word regulatory and adding the words monetary, cooperative, or advisory directly afterwards. As a result, Mr. Speaker, Clause 3 in respect to Section 23, subsection 2 of the law now provides in relation to a board or board member of a public authority that the principal law is amended in Section 23 by repealing subsection 2 and substituting the following subsection. Notwithstanding subsection 1, where the function or duty exercised is, where applicable, regulatory, monetary, cooperative, or advisory, the provision relating to negligence shall not apply. Clause 5 proposes similar changes, this time in relation to the liability of employees of a public authority. The principal law is amended in Section 54 by repealing subsection 2 and substituting the following subsection. Notwithstanding subsection 1, where the function or duty exercised is, where applicable, regulatory, monetary, cooperative, or advisory, the provision relating to negligence shall not apply. Mr. Speaker, the proposed changes will make it clearer that the tort of negligence will have no application where a regulator is performing the functions enumerated in sections 23, subsection 2 and 54. Mr. Speaker, Section 42, subsection 7 of the law references a chief executive officer or a staff member to whom the chief officer has delegated the function of appointing other staff. The law intends that the chief executive officer would have the power to subdelegate, and the reference to chief officer is incorrect in this instance. Therefore, Clause 4 of the bill seeks to correct a minor drafting error by subsection 42 to replace the words chief officer with chief executive officer. Mr. Speaker, the amendment bill has been drafted in such a manner as to make it generally applicable as possible, while also specifically accommodating the concerns raised by the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General has advised that the proposed amendment should help to allay fears of so-called floodgate of litigation as it relates to the tort of negligence for regulators by providing adequate protection from legal challenges while maintaining the necessary freedom and flexibility for regulators to discharge their statutory responsibilities. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to commend the Public Authorities Amendment Bill 2018, and I hereby request the support of the members of this honorable House for its passage.
Does any other member wish to speak? The member for East End.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this matter has been around for a little while, in that at least back to when we had the meeting in Cayman, there was, that was 2014, 15, that we had a concern with the indemnity that was issued to Cayman Airways in Cayman. I think we started discussing the possibility of amending the authority law to 15, 16, sometime. And the Attorney General promised that this would be done and allay the fears of directors. Likewise, when the Minister for Commerce recently brought the indemnity for the Liquor Licensing Board, I think. The matter was raised again. Now, this, and there were promises made to correct or to make sure, to review the possibility of doing something other than doing these indemnities. Now, this covers the authorities, which includes Cayman Airways. So well, no, that's true. Cayman Airways is a company, Seneco and Cayman Airways. What are we going to do with them and the boards? Because right now, boards, there are certain boards in government, as soon as something happens, such as what happened with the Liquor Licensing Board, we come down here and get an indemnity, give them indemnity, and there are other boards, such as Immigration Board, the Immigration Appeals, that we have not issued indemnity to. And I know there is no encompassing law to cover all those boards. Is it the necessity to amend all of those in order that the same provisions relating to negligence does not apply? So in the Deputy Governor's winding up, I wonder if that could be addressed. Whilst we don't have a problem with putting it in here for the authorities, because it covers everybody, instead of every few months you bring in an indemnity down here for us for the legislature to approve. But certainly we need to get to the companies and entities and boards as well. And provisions needs to be made for those, instead of just whole and solely the authorities. I thank you, Mr.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? I called on the mover to use her right of reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would also like to thank the honorable member from East End for his contribution. He has rightly identified the history with these indemnification clauses that tend to exist in various, either the constitutions of the various companies or within the establishing legislation for the various statutory authorities. I am happy to report that his concerns have very much been taken on board and that this work is already ongoing. While the Public Authorities Law allows us an opportunity to address government-owned companies and statutory authorities in this sort of omnibus provision, for the various other boards that would operate, we're looking at the individual legislation that enables those various bodies. I've been advised that the Attorney General's Chamber is currently looking at about 35 different laws to look at the provisions and to agree the proper treatment of that. This work is being advanced currently by the Legislative Drafting Department, and we would hope to bring those changes in due course. I would say that in looking at it holistically, as opposed to taking each just in turn, the additional advantage is that you make sure that there's harmonization in terms of the coverage that's provided and that proper consideration can be given to the provisions to make sure that the right balance is struck with accountability, but also not unduly burdening particularly entities that have a regulatory function, attracting undue liability and restricting their ability to perform their roles. So the Attorney General's Chambers has charged the Legislative Drafting Department. The work is ongoing, and we hope to extend the types of coverage that is currently contained in the Public Authorities Law, or will be further enhanced with the passage of this bill to other bodies that have similar provisions. So that having been said, I hope that addresses the concerns of the member from East End, and I thank the members of this Honorable House for their support of this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Public Authorities Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The Public Authorities Amendment Bill 2018 has been read a second time.
The Law Reform Commission Amendment Bill 2018. CPC.
Gloria, you do it? Premier? So what? Honorable the Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General is actually appearing before the court now, and thus his absence here. I'm certainly not purporting to be the Attorney General, but I will move the amendment bill which he had intended to do. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the second reading of a bill entitled the Law Reform Commission Amendment Bill 2018.
The bill has been duly moved. Honorable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, permit me to start with the more substantive of the proposed amendments. The bill seeks to modernize the conduct of proceedings within the Commission through the use of technology. In this regard, consistent with the utilization of modern electronic methods of conducting and validating meetings or any other type of proceedings, the bill provides for meetings of the Commission to be convened through video conference, teleconference, or any other form of electronic communication determined by the chairman. The provision for this, Mr. Speaker, is contained in Clause 7 of the bill. Under the legislation, it is proposed that the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Solicitor General will be recognized as ex officio members of the Commission. This amendment seeks to dispense with the need to go through the Cabinet appointment process that currently obtains to confirm membership on the Commission of both the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Solicitor General. As a consequence of this amendment, an amendment is proposed to the principal law, which will now only require the Attorney General to recommend the appointment of the chairman and not less than 2 other commissioners in order to maintain the current statutory minimum requirement of 5 commissioners on the Commission. This is contained in Clause 3. Mr. Speaker, Clause 5 seeks to make it clear that in light of the proposed ex officio membership of the Director of Public Prosecutions and the Solicitor General on the Commission, only appointed members of the Commission will be paid an allowance. Generally, the bill seeks to recognize the separation of powers between the office of the Governor and the Cabinet with respect to certain functions as provided in the Constitution Order 2009. As such, where applicable, the bill seeks to delete all references to Governor and substitutes them with Cabinet, as seen in Clauses 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. Mr. Speaker, finally, the bill provides Cabinet with the power to make regulations. This is Clause 8. And so, Mr. Speaker, and members of the Legislative Assembly, on behalf of the Honorable Attorney General, I now seek the approval of this House in passing the Law Reform Commission Amendment Bill 2018.
Does any other member wish to speak? Does any other member wish to speak? If not, does the Premier wish to wind up at this point?
Mr. Speaker, just to thank members for their tacit support.
The question is that a bill shortly entitled the Law Reform Commission Amendment Bill 2018 be given a second reading. All those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The Law Reform Commission Amendment Bill 2018 has been given a second reading.
The Criminal Procedure Code Amendment Bill 2018.
Honorable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, may I ask for a short suspension? We're trying to get on to the Honorable Attorney General with respect to the Criminal Procedure Code Amendment Bill, because I don't have any briefing at all with respect to that.
The House will take a brief suspension while we reach the Honorable Attorney General. Ask members to remain seated, please.
Any messages you all have, Carrie, just give them to me and we'll stay here. Oh, and the sacrifice, the personal sacrifices I have made.
Yeah.